This is Reverend Don Lewis coming to you from the beautiful metaverse, and more specifically from beautiful Danville, Illinois, homeland of the Correllian tradition. And welcome to Midday with Reverend Don. And as you know, if you follow Midday with Reverend Don, you can type your questions or comments into whatever platform you happen to be watching on. They'll show up here in my chat room, and we can talk directly, which is one of my favorite parts of this program. This week, we have begun talking about the fall of the year and also about death and the realm of spirits as we head into that portion of the year. And we've talked about a couple of different aspects. Today, I thought I would talk a little bit about what we mean by certain terms. And because, when people talk about the dead, the spirits, they often use words that seem interchangeable on the surface, but aren't necessarily depending on who you're talking to. And so I thought we'd start there today. And the words that we're talking about are spirit, ghost, soul, all of which some people will use interchangeably, but all of which also have their own unique meanings in a number of different circumstances. That aren't always the same from one tradition to another. And hello to Brian in the chat room. It's good to see you, Brian. I come from a Correllian background, so I'm going to use the terms in the way that we would use them. I'm certainly not going to claim that the way we use them would be universal, but I do think that they're fairly common. In terms of how you would differentiate, for example, a spirit from a ghost. So what is a ghost? A ghost, and hello to Raven Wolf in the chat room, hello to Raven in the chat room, it's good to see you. A ghost, and we should probably add the term poltergeist into this conversation as well. But a ghost, as I understand this term, and as I find it used most commonly in metaphysics, is a spirit that is still tied to the earth and has not properly crossed over into the next world. I used to be under the impression that it was the entirety of the spirit that was caught that way, and I think sometimes it is, but it can also be just a portion of their energy. And this is why when you encounter ghosts, you don't normally encounter a complete being. Sometimes you do. And hello to Mary in the chat room. It's good to see you, Mary. But very often it's only a certain action that's repeated. And Ravenwolf said it's fragments, like burnt toast lingering in the air. And, I do think that for a ghost that can be true. Now, I think that it also varies. I think there are times when the full consciousness of the life has not moved forward after death and is still connected to this world, but sometimes it is only those fragments. One of the most famous ghost stories in the Western world are about wives of Henry VIII, specifically Anne Boleyn and Catherine Howard. And there is a famous story that many people claim to have experienced of seeing Anne Boleyn late at night practicing for her execution, which in fact she did in real life. But apparently a certain portion of her consciousness is caught in this and still there doing it. And for Catherine Howard, it's running up the hallway when she first found out that she was being arrested to try to get the attention of her husband and found she could not do it. But many people have claimed to see her as a ghost repeating this action. Those are examples of what I mean by just specific actions that get repeated. I knew a woman once who claimed she had a ghost in her apartment. There was an older woman rocking in a rocking chair. That's all the older woman did. You wouldn't see her doing anything else, but she was still there. And Ravenwolf says that the emotions before her death of being kept waiting to die for months remain behind in a place where she lived. And yes, that is often what happens here. Um, it can be all kinds of different emotions, but it's emotion that holds it. And there is a specific technique for helping these spirits to cross over the rest of the way, which addresses those emotions. It's called crossing over. Um, I mentioned the other day I'm working on a new book. The title of the book will be The Corellian Book of the Dead, and it's going to include, for example, that ritual on crossing over, even though we have mentioned it in other places also. But it's very important to know if you want to help someone to cross over. You can do it as they're dying. You can do it afterwards. You can do it years afterwards if a part of them is caught this way. Now, there's also a question to me. When a person sees a ghost, can anyone see that ghost, or does that soul have a connection to the soul of the ghost? For example, being a reincarnation or a parallel or something like that. I have no answer to that, but the thought has occurred to me that sometimes that may also play a role. I believe it was Margaret Murray who had the theory that ghosts were not conscious, but rather a recording of emotions that had happened in a certain place. And I don't exactly agree with that, and I don't exactly disagree with that. As I say, I think that it's only a certain part of the spirit that's caught there. So in a manner of speaking, it is the emotion of that event that is caught there, not the entirety of the spirit, usually. But I think it's more than just a recording also, because when I've worked with this kind of ghost, they've been able to react as perfectly full beings. I've done a lot of crossing overs in my life. And in working with them, they express themselves far more completely than whatever experience people claim to have had with them. And hello to Jan in the chat room. Hello to Lynn in the chat room. It's good to see you both. There was a time that I was doing a lot of crossing over ceremonies. Most commonly, what you find is one of the several different things. Sometimes they're afraid to cross completely into the afterlife, often for religious reasons, that they think they're going to be blamed for something that they did. And therefore, they cannot completely move forward. Another thing is sometimes they feel they have unresolved business, and sometimes they do, but they can still come back and resolve their business as fully crossed over spirits. But they may not know that. And sometimes they're waiting for someone. These are the main reasons I've found when you need to help someone to cross over that you're likely to find. And very often it's that first one. It's fear of what's waiting for them. And the main thing you have to do is help them to understand there's nothing to be afraid of. And that's easier for some than for others. I also have heard stories, for example. Well, I've experienced at least one spirit of a small child who was waiting for her mother, not realizing the mother had fully crossed, and was there as a spirit, but the child couldn't see her. Another where someone was looking for an important object that they had lost, and didn't feel they could move on without it. There are going to be all kinds of reasons. But in crossing someone over, you have to help them to realize those reasons should not stop them. So that is a ghost, as I understand the term. And like I say, it can be more or less of the consciousness of that life that you're going to find. And this goes back to how we were talking about the nature of the soul yesterday, that the soul is much more than just our conscious mind. It has all sorts of different expressions within it. including multiple expressions of any given life. One of the first teachings I remember in life was my grandmother's teaching that if you didn't like this life, you could repeat it. What I would say is that you will probably do that simultaneously, partly because everything is simultaneously. She perceived it as repeating it. And that is something that I remember from very early in life. So the soul may have this part of its consciousness caught as a ghost, but that doesn't mean other parts of its consciousness aren't moving forward just fine, including other parts of that life. So Ravenwolf says there's a really famous story of a ghost from Hampton Court with a child who's been dead for centuries that wins the annual Halloween costume event dressed in her original clothes. It really winds up the volunteers who work at the place as they can't ever find the child to give her the award. Oh, that's very, very interesting. That would make an interesting movie. But so that's a ghost. Now let's talk about a poltergeist for a moment. And if you're of my generation, you'll remember the Poltergeist movie franchise, which has nothing to do with actual poltergeists. A poltergeist, and the term poltergeist is German and it means a noisy ghost. But the general understanding of poltergeists at this time, certainly the one I subscribe to, is that they're not an aspect of any sort of spirit at all. They're simply ungrounded energy. The one case where they might be connected to a deceased spirit is if it's the spirit that's stirring up the ungrounded energy. Ravenwolf was just talking in the chat room. I remember when Ravenwolf's father was dying, and we were all in the chat room, my Monday night chat room, and we watched as things you would normally think of as poltergeist activity were happening in the house. Doors were opening and closing. Things were occurring with no one making them occur. It was very interesting. But that's an example of a poltergeist, in this case connected to a spiritual happening. But usually a poltergeist is connected to a living person. And that living person most commonly is either a teenager just coming into pubescence, a woman entering menopause, or an open clairvoyant who's not dealing with their energy properly. And what causes poltergeist experiences, and there are things like, furniture moving around, doors opening and closing, beds shaking for no particular reason, that sort of thing. And what causes it is the ungrounded energy connected to these phenomena. All you have to do to close it down is to close down that energy, to ground it out. Probably the most famous ghost story, if you want to call it that, of my lifetime, The Exorcist novel and movie from back in the day, was actually based on what appears to be, at best, a poltergeist story, because every metaphysical thing that's supposed to have actually happened in the real story, not to say the movie, is just a poltergeist thing. The bed supposedly shook. I think a chair moved around. There was an unexplained scratch. These are all poltergeist things, and they're not anything to be particularly afraid of. I remember for a little while I was watching the paranormal shows that you would see on cable television for a while, and I remember that, well, they would always seem to find a demon in the basement. But in one of them, the only thing that had really happened, or the most serious thing, was a small box had flown off a shelf and hit someone. And while that certainly isn't a pleasant experience, it wasn't a big box. It didn't cause any damage. But that's not a demon. That's a poltergeist who just needed to close down that energy. And Mary says, "It's a demon. It's a demon. Run for your life. Run." That's exactly the attitude the people in this program took. The medium, I guess she was, advised them to move out of the house, sell it for a penny, move across running water somewhere. All they needed to do was close down the energy. And yes, there was a child in early teenage years, as there usually is in a poltergeist experience, whose energy was just very unbalanced at that time. But you have to know these things. Oh, and Mary says also the new owners get the demon. Yeah, that was the other point of it, wasn't it? This person was telling them, not telling them to do anything about the demon, just get away. That's kind of an interesting piece of advice, but maybe they were looking to acquire some cheap property. I don't know. But what you would really do in such a situation is you would ground the energy. And with any kind of haunting type of situation, whether it's a poltergeist or something else, it must have energy to manifest. If you want to stop it, you close down that energy, you ground it out, and there will be nothing for it to manifest with. It needs to use the energy on this side of the veil to have a physical manifestation. And if you close that down, it cannot do anything. Now, having talked about those things, what is a spirit? And how does that differ from the soul? If you remember, we were talking yesterday about the idea that the soul is a particular part of the being where all of the experiences of all the lives are stored. And Mary says, how would we ground this energy? Well, you'd ground it the same way you'd ground your own. You would use basically the same technique you would use for grounding your own energy. There are a number of them listed right in first degree, actually. And instead of using it for yourself, you would apply it to the physical building. You would take the energy and you would bring it down into the earth, for want of a better way to describe it, and release it. That would be what I would recommend to start with. Now, there are other things you can do if more is necessary. But, that's the simplest thing. You can fill the room with yellow light, for example, or yellow light with silver stars as part of that process also, to make it faster or more effective, and then just ground it all out at once. And there should be nothing left for use in anything manifesting. Now, other people use other techniques. There are lots of techniques, but any of them should work. Now, as we were saying, a soul, as we use the term in Correllianism, is a particular part of the being between the astral and the monad. And the soul is where, the soul is basically where all of your lifetimes have their origin and their continued presence within. They're always there. They don't really go away. They may be dormant sometimes, but they don't go away. And it can be more than one version of a given lifetime. It can be, hello to Judy in the chat room. It may be many parallel lifetimes at one point. It's quite complex when you get into it, because it's not like our consciousness, which is a single point of thought, but far more complex. A spirit, on the other hand, as I use it in this context, is when someone has died and crossed completely into the afterlife, as opposed to a ghost who has not. The spirit may then become an ancestor or a spirit guide or just a spirit. Not everyone becomes a spirit guide. Not everyone becomes an ancestor. It depends on the person, on where they were, on what they want to do, and on who in this life might be calling on them, and whether they continue to have an association with this life. But once they've crossed over, and actually entered into the world of spirit, then they're not bound to this world at all. they can interact with it. And when we refer to ancestors and spirit guides, obviously they do. But it's not because they're bound to it. It's because they've made a certain commitment. I remember Lady Bitterwind, her father, whose name was Harry Daw, basically always had the attitude that, once I'm dead, leave me alone. I'm going to go do whatever I'm going to do. And only once did she ever have a message from him. She dreamed of him one night in a party where he told her he was fine, he was having fun, and she should do the same thing. But for many spirits, that's what they do. They don't maintain a connection to this world. They simply move on. And in some spiritual systems, such as certain forms of spiritualism, for example, they believe that's what should happen, that the spirits should not remain connected to this world, although that's not a Corellian point of view. Although it depends, again, on the spirit. The best depiction of the spirit world that I have seen in this life is in a movie called The Adding Machine from roughly 1969, 1970. Starred Milo O'Shea and Phyllis Diller and Billy Whitelaw, I believe. And in the story, Milo O'Shea murders his wife, Phyllis Diller, gets executed and goes into what we would call Summerland. And he's totally confused when he gets there because there's no punishment waiting for him. In fact, he's in the middle of a carnival where everyone can have whatever they want. And he is completely unable to deal with this. And although I would not expect the afterlife to necessarily take that form, it's the form that was there for him, representing the ability to have what you desire. And the message of the story was that those who are most blessed remain. Anyone can, but only the most blessed do. Meaning those who have no further connection, at least at the moment, to this physical world. But most spirits are still caught in things they need to resolve and cannot be happy in the middle of, for want of a better way to put it, a paradise. Because no matter where you go, there you are. I've always thought that was a pretty good explanation for everything I understand about the spirit world. That it's your own connections that will bring you back here, not that anyone is going to make you come back, but that you won't be able to stay if you're not ready. But having said that, I think most spirits do stay for a while to rest and rejuvenate. My understanding is when you cross over, you are met by those who loved you and are waiting for you. You meet with spirit, however you want to think of spirit, in this case as a neutral form for describing deity. Deity or deities, however you want to look at it. And it may be different for everyone, how they perceive that. And you review your life. And there is a judgment on your life, but not by deity, but by yourself. Are you pleased with what you did? And then you get to go on. You get to go on to whatever is waiting for you in the afterlife. And for some, that will be being a spirit guide. It may be being an ancestor. It may be being a healer spirit of some sort. For others, it's just time to rest and rejuvenate. People who have described the other side describe there as being plenty going on that people can do, and I don't particularly doubt that. And my understanding is when you first cross over, you experience it pretty much like this life for most people. And hello to Judy in the chat room. Good to see you, Judy. Much like the ancient Egyptians talked about all those thousands of years ago. You initially perceive it as being just a better form of this life. Now, the longer you're there, the more you come to realize it's an energetic existence rather than a physical one. And for some people who already have experience with this, that comes faster than it does for others. But it is a matter of basically how soon you adjust to it. And for those who become spirit guides, ancestors, which if you think about it are a kind of spirit guide, or spirits who work in various forms such as healing spirits, there's lots to be done. And that will often involve you again in this world in ways that may be very satisfying. But I mean, the guides I've worked with throughout my life have always seemed quite happy for the most part with the work. The ancestors I've worked with have been very happy interacting in that way. And taking a moment, I used to know a lady who loved to say that, your drunk Uncle Fred, once he dies and crosses over, is still going to be your drunk Uncle Fred. You don't want to work with him as an ancestor. But that has not been my experience. My experience is when you work with them as an ancestor, or any crossed over spirit for that matter, you're dealing with their higher self, not their lower self. And this was very clear when my father died and crossed over. I've had a lot of experience with this spirit, but when I've experienced it, it was very different from his conscious expression. Far more advanced, far more at peace, and definitely a higher self. And the things that were problematic about him in this life were no longer there. So, now Judy asks, have you ever heard of a spirit eater? And no, I can't really say that I have, but if you explained the term to me, I could possibly speak to it. Unless you're talking about a sin eater. And a sin eater was something that used to exist not all that far in the past in certain parts of, I think, Wales primarily. And what they did is that when someone died, they would come and symbolically eat the sins that person had created. The idea being that they would take onto themselves whatever guilt that person had left behind. There's a very interesting episode of the Night Gallery on this subject back in the 70s that I have never forgotten because it was so well done. Judy says they absorb other spirits. I can't say that I've exactly encountered that concept. But it's something I wouldn't mind hearing about. But it's not something I can speak to at this moment. Maybe I'll see what I can find out about it. But it's not been my experience that that spirits, being ultimately a manifestation of the divine, can cease to exist in any particular way. They may become dormant, but part of them is always there within the expression of the seven planes. But these are some of the subject that I would talk about regarding the difference between these different kinds of entities when we're talking about ghosts and spirits and poltergeists, etc. I see we've come to the end of our half hour. Tomorrow, I think I will talk about the customs that we follow regarding death, things like funerals, how to interact with your ancestors and the like, and maybe how different cultures have done this also. So please join me tomorrow. We'll talk about that then. I hope that you're having a lovely day. I love you all. I love spending this time with you. And let us close with our prayer, as we commonly do. Divine Mother Goddess, Divine Father God, beloved ancestors, we thank you for all that you do in our lives, and we pray that you will lead us forward, both in this life and after, to our own best experiences and our highest self. Divine Mother Goddess, Divine Father God, beloved ancestors, we thank you, and knowing you are always with us, but from respect, we thank you for your presence, now and always. And may you always be blessed. And I thank you for your presence, and I will see you tomorrow. And until next time, may you be blessed, now and always.